I'll be reporting the continuation of post-EDSA Philippine foreign relations in 1986 until 2001. Fidel V. Ramos, as the 12th President of the Philippines, he dismantled monopolies that have stunted the growth of industries. The rules on ownership of telecommunications, air transport, and banking and investments were liberalized. New investments in shipping were encouraged, and a comprehensive Build, Operate, Transfer or the BOT scheme, including the power sector, was adopted. Ramos and Romulo were co-equal partners in managing the country's foreign relations. However, Ramos earned the title the traveling president as he often had the upper hand in state visits to different countries during his term. Ramos also took an assertive role in the expansion of membership in ASEAN, with the admission of Vietnam in 1995, Laos and Myanmar in 1997, and Cambodia in 1998. It was also during his term when the Philippines successfully hosted the APEC in 1996 in Subic, in which it was the summit's venue. The APEC, or the Asia-Pacific Economic Council, meant to strengthen the multilateral trading system, enhance trade and investments liberation, and intensify development cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. It also expands and accelerates trade and investments, as well as facilitation programs to further promote the flow of goods, services, and capital by eliminating non-tariff barriers. Ramos also emphasized the importance of human resource development and protection, as well as the technology transfer. Floor contemplation. Midway in Ramos' term, the issue of floor contemplation exploded and the Philippine media and public opinion turned against the Ramos government for its inability to save the life of a Filipino worker. Floor contemplation, she was a Filipino domestic helper accused of murder, and later she was hanged in Singapore. And as a consequence of the contemplation case, the Philippines government began to enact laws aimed at protecting rights and welfare of Filipinos working overseas, and negotiated bilateral worker protection agreements with labor-receiving countries like Singapore. Toward the end of Ramos' term, Domingo Siazon credited Ramos for his accomplishments as the President of the Philippines. Moving forward, we have Joseph Ejercito Estrada. So Joseph Ejercito Estrada, also known by the nickname Irap, is a Filipino politician and a former actor who served as the 9th President of the Philippines from 1992 to 1998, 13th President of the Philippines from 1998 until 2001, and the 21st Mayor of the City of Manila from 2013 until 2019. Did you know that Estrada was the first Philippine president who did not finish a university degree and whose exposure to politics was mainly at the local levels? He retained Domingo Siazon as Foreign Affairs Secretary and relied much on his expertise. The Estrada administration echoed the thrust identified by the Ramos administration and singled out only 3 pillars of its foreign policy. These are: first, the preservation of the country's territorial integrity and national security; second, the promotion of development through economic diplomacy; and third, the protection of rights and welfare of Filipino overseas workers. However, Estrada's 6-year term ended abruptly when the Second People Power Revolution took place in January 2001, following an aborted impeachment proceeding. Vice President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo took over as the 14th President of the country. Next, we have the post-EDSA Philippine foreign policy. Foreign policy issues can be classified as 2: the traditional and non-traditional. Traditional issues deals with issues of power, diplomacy, alliances, security, development, and world peace. These actually spring from the nature of global power distribution, among others. However, the non-traditional issues, these are the newer concerns that have not been in the usual staple of world power politics, such as trade, environment, migrant labor, human rights, technology transfer, communications, transportation, and technology. Globalization and interdependence have made these more prominent, and their proponents have become more active players in world politics. Next, you have the termination of the 1947 Military Bases Agreement. During August 1951, a mutual defense treaty was signed between the representatives of the Philippines and the U.S., in which the overall accord contained 8 articles and dictated that both nations would support each other if were to be attacked by an external party. In 1979, after 2 years of negotiation, the basis agreement was renewed with some amendments. Long a thorn in the underside of the RP-US relations, the bases were due to expire in 1991. The effective framework for the continuing relationship between RP and US, as it was meant to foster dependence instead of true friendship, cooperation, and sovereign equality. The vote thus ended nearly a century of the operation of US military bases in the country and testified to the Filipino sense of independence in determining the course of its future relations with its former colonial master. However, in 1999, the Philippine Senate approved the Visiting Forces Agreement with the United States. The VFA, or the Visiting Forces Agreement, promotes the bilateral defense cooperation and gave substance to the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty. It also regulates the circumstances and conditions under which U.S. forces may be present in the Philippines. It also essentially facilitates the exit and entry of American aircraft and vessels. A strong point of the VFA is the institution of security cooperation between the Philippines and the U.S., in which the VFA addressed the marked deficiencies in the earlier implementation of the 1947 Bases Treaty. Countries in the Asia-Pacific region, including Philippines, view security as the viability of their national interests, goals, and valued institutions and way of life. Security values stress preservation of sovereignty, territorial integrity, well-being of the people, their identity and national values, peace, adequate defense, and military structures. Let's move forward to the environmentalism in foreign policy. Philippines was one of the 180 states that signed the 1992 UN Framework on Climate Change, in which the Rio Summit was seen as a big step toward global cooperation to combat climate change. Philippines forged cooperation with other countries in the area of environment due to its gargantuan problems such as toxic wastes, urban congestion and pollution, deforestation, floods, greenhouse effect, unsanitary conditions, and spread of diseases both in human and non-human habitats. The end of U.S. military bases left huge bulks of hazardous wastes. This led to the creation of Philippine Task Force on Hazardous Waste. In Vietnam, you have signed the Memorandum of Understanding on Joint Oceanographic and Marine Scientific Expedition in the South China Sea. In China, the Philippines has standing cooperation in agriculture, irrigation, and other areas. Other countries with joint environment projects with the Philippines are Denmark in Pasig River Rehabilitation Program and the Netherlands in support of the Maritime Science Institute and the Pacific Islands Forum for Maritime and Fishery Issues, Climate Change, Nuclear Testing, and Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Philippines, realizing the benefits of communications and technology in seeking national welfare, signed with Mongolia in 2000, in which we signed the Agreement on Scientific and Technological Cooperation. In Iran, we signed the Cooperation in Combating Abuse and Illicit Trafficking of Controlled Substances and Chemicals in Tehran. In Singapore, Philippines signed an agreement on electronic cooperation. And globally, Philippines cooperate with countries that are technologically advanced in communications. Example is the Finland, in which Finland has high technology companies in telecommunications and electronic software solution and internet multimedia. The United States and the Philippines jointly address the issues of global terrorism, the illegal narcotics trade, human trafficking, and other transnational issues. The RPUS issued a letter of agreement on narcotics control and law enforcement assistance of U.S. for a computer system interconnection project of the National Drug Law Enforcement and Prevention Coordination Center and Philippine Center for Transnational Crime. So the conclusion of this report is that the notions of equality, deliberation, and participation have become more pronounced in the conduct of the country's foreign policy agenda. The national security and Philippine-American relations have become the arena where the components of democratization had to be tested. The non-traditional foreign policy issues mark the need to maintain sustainable development, undertake more vigorous international cooperation, and democratize and legitimize the positive effects of globalization. The post-martial law and post-EDSA Philippine foreign policy and relations have expanded beyond the traditional power and security relations, and the country's political leadership has met the challenge of the new global dimension in varying ways. Also, the democratic process after Marcos has led to legitimize a vision of a country that demands equality, deliberation, and participation, as well as sense of dignity and well-being in local and international relations to fulfill its national goals and aspirations. And that's all. Thank you.